everyone, and welcome to episode number 7 of Really Bad Security. You've got the Really Bad Security team here. We've got Lloyd and Aaron and myself. As you know, if you watch like Not Another Demo or you join any of our CSA West Michigan events, we talk a lot about good security and how to do security correctly and the right investments to make and how to talk to your business and involve your business and all of these, great security things you should be doing. But alas, we have found out that there is actually not just bad security that's happening out there. There is really bad security that's happening out there. And we are super happy today to bring back what I think he's about to hit like Hall of Fame status with the CSA now, guys. We need shirts or something, right? But this will be the third time I think we've had Patrick Garrity from Blumira talking with us. It's always a blast. We're super excited to have him back for this episode of Really Bad Security. And Patrick is going to tell us today and talk to us about some steps that you can take to ensure that your SIEM fails and fails miserably. So with that, Patrick, welcome aboard again. Feel free to introduce yourself and Blumira, and then let's jump right into it.
Sweet. Thanks for having me on today. I'm excited to join. A little bit of background. Live in Michigan as well. I'm on the east side.
I didn't know that.
So
It's an Ann Arbor guy.
Yeah. I live in Plymouth. So, but have kind of like lived on the streets of Ann Arbor for many years. Working at Duo. Then we got acquired by Cisco. I've worked in the managed service provider side before that, and then joined Blumira about 1.5 years ago. When everyone told me, don't join a SIEM company because all of them suck.
You're like, I need some challenge in my life. My life is boring, so I'm going to not do what they say.
Are you sure you didn't hear the same thing when you joined Duo, though? Because
no, actually, key indicator of joining a company is people telling you the market sucks, because if it sucks, it means there's tons of opportunity, right? And I'm not trying to, there's some great vendors out there in the space. I don't want to discount them. But no, more or less, it's just funny. 2-factor RSA was around and everyone's like, those tokens suck. Nobody uses it. And Duo became a household standard, right, of security with 2-factor. So when I heard people telling me the same thing, they're like, all of them suck, I was like, hey, this is the perfect market to get into and spend some time in. And I think like through those experiences, I've actually learned a lot. I didn't actually know that much about as much as I know now about SIEM and detection and response. And so all too often SIEM fails. Like SIEM is like the #1 failing project. So I think this is kind of fun of talking about like all the things you can do wrong. And there's things too, even with us, we'll tell people to go do and they just don't do them, right? And so we can kind of run through all these different areas people need to be thinking about and be a little bit prescriptive of what they can do as it relates to SIEM. And there's one other last thing. In the last 4 weeks, I became a viral TikToker. Which is kind of funny. That's
I gotta hear about this one. All right.
I have 400,000 followers and growing. It's pretty wild. So,
and but it's not related. Literally just started that, right?
It was about. My kids were like, Dad, you'd be great on TikTok, and I didn't think anything of it. I made a few videos left, and came back and shot one video, and it went viral. So then I built content up on it, and it's just been wild. But we're not here to talk about that.
It's not related to security, right? It's related to like skating and stuff, right?
No, it's related to skateboarding and then our vintage arcades, wild arcade and history. So it's kind of cool. I do have a concept of a TikTok for security. I think the whole security industry has been so hesitant to using the product because of security reasons.
Yeah.
But I think like people are going to end up using it regardless or anyway. It's a consumer thing. So
there's
we're on Zoom, right? We're recording on Zoom.
Yeah. I mean, some of my kids, they get their news there, they get everything like that. There is a generation of people that honestly are folks that we're trying to reach, right? We have to help educate the next generation, and that's where they're at. And if we're not talking to them where they're at, we're going to miss being able to even talk to them. So
absolutely.
Yeah, and I think these avenues, quick content, right? Quick snippets, which we'll talk about. So we'll go through and hop through a few different areas. I'm gonna throw up some slides. There's GIFs in them, so I promise they're fun. And this will kind of guide the conversation discussion around what things you can do to make sure your SIM fails. So the first one, and you have to be mindful, like the size organization in which you are, these statements might not be completely true or accurate. But like the first one I would say is like, oh man, we want to log everything in a single solution for both application performance monitoring as well as threat detection. Because like they're two completely different things, and like you're likely to fail unless you have a very large team that's separating what's important for these two different things. And so all too often people throw these things together and they try and just dump everything and anything, and it ends up really hard to do either of them effective.
Do you think that's here's your first softball question? I'll give you some tough questions later. Your first softball question. Do you think it's like this because of security marketing and the zest to get the sale and everything else, and the fact that some of it's paid by all you can consume? Are we part of the problem?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. And I think the other thing is just the approach, which is like, hey, throw me all your data and you can choose to do whatever you want, but you have to be a data scientist to do that, right?
Absolutely.
And so the reality is it's like, yeah, most of these solutions are premised on you throwing every and all data possible source at them, which substantially increases your cost exponentially because that's how they're licensed. And then it doesn't give you focus. And so no longer is the product focused on solving application or threat detection. And once you lose that focus, it starts to become increasingly complex to be successful, right?
Man, you're being awful quiet. I have a couple more comments on this one.
I agree. I had nothing to add there. That was well said. Honestly, I'm mesmerized by the Formula One car going around the car.
You keep staring at it.
I second that. I can't stop staring at it.
Yeah. So like it's kind of, I meant to do an analogy here, right? So like application performance, you have Formula One car, right? And then like threat detection, you're like trying to sift through logs, finding anomalies, like digging for gold.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like you're like, okay, I'm gonna use a Formula One car to dig a hole for gold. It's not really gonna work, but you can do it. And so I just say like, yeah, you just have to be mindful. I should have like a morphed car of like a claw on top of the Formula One car. But I think the reality is like this gets mixed up quite often and frequent because they are all ultimately logs when we're talking about SIM and then application performance. It's just they do much different things, and most people don't know what to parse or what's important out of those logs and that information. So if you have a solution that's designed specifically for that, it likely takes on that piece of it. One of the product decisions we've made is like not to do application performance for now, right? And maybe at some point we decide to do, probably not though. It's like, let's focus on the security stack and do that really well.
It's two different worlds, two completely different worlds.
Yeah, and customers will try and make that a key requirement sometimes, right? And we kind of push back and explain why, because we wouldn't do either very well. And that's the reality of most of the solutions end up struggling doing either of them well when they take the approach of doing both.
I think it's kind of that try to make everybody happy and then no one ends up being happy, right? So if you're trying to do everything, the chances of you being able to do everything great are almost zero.
Do you think this is going to get worse because of the big push to data lakes and everything else? Because of the fact, so let me set the stage, because I mean I'm about to give Lloyd serious PTSD, so I'm gonna set the stage. Right, so you have multiple areas of the business, like for example, we have the insurance wing and we have the medical side, right? And those are different types of data, but there's such overlap, right? Because the insurance side needs key information on, like what your status of your health is and everything else. We have a situation where we're in a highly regulated industry to where we can't seem like we're having a competitive advantage. So there's certain types of data that we're not supposed to be able to share. But yet you have insight analysts and different business data analysts that do need access to all of it. So the upcoming world of having a data lake, everything is in there. I worry that they don't understand the points that you talked about metadata, and it's going to be a nightmare to be able to pull that key threat data or data access out of there, right? So how are we going to avoid that, right? So we gave the really big or really bad security example. How do we solve that? Is metadata the key?
No. I think it depends on what size business you are and what size in the sophistication. So for an enterprise company, a large enterprise company, data lake makes a lot of sense. You have resources to assign metadata tags, stuff like that, and be able to organize it for access. But the reality is like most organizations don't even know what to do with the data lake or what it is. Especially as you get down to the SMB and mid-market space, which is where we predominantly play.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's like, first off, like, what's a data lake? I mean, also, what's a SIEM, right? That's a very frequently asked question by a lot of people in IT, is the reality. And so what they really are trying to do is protect their business, right? And make sure it's secure. And so, yeah, I think,
well, and I think, Aaron, if you think about some of the stuff we've been talking about lately, right, is that, attackers are maybe you don't go after the big company because that they've got security and they've got resources and they've got the teams and all of that stuff. You go after their downstream vendors or other partners that are smaller and find your way in there, and then make your way up to the larger organization.
I've never heard of that here in Michigan. That's never happened.
No, okay.
or you try and find a midstream, as in oil and gas, right? And I think that's one that hits home a lot. Is like there was not much sophistication in that attack, right? And they ended up shutting down, but it's doing the basics that actually get you the ability to have a chance, keeping things up to date, patched, secure, but then also doing some form of monitoring. So I'll move to the second point, which is so I think the first point was the fact that, hey, using two different systems. So get a system focused on the security and threat detection would be my first. And then the second one is if you just make sure you collect every and all log possible. That's the number one thing you want to do to fail. Because you have to figure out a way of how do I prioritize and how do I be successful here? And if all you do is focus on, hey, ingestion of all logs, most people end up with a great repository of logs to investigate why they got breached, but it doesn't actually help them identify incidences or I'm sorry, stop a security issue or breach early on. And so this is a pretty common one that we see, which is people want to just collect any and all logs possible. And that's not actually measurably successful in helping stop attacks.
Yeah, why do you think that is? What is it? Why, I guess, why do people feel like they need to collect everything?
Oh, they just don't know. Right. And so it's well, hey, I'm going to have a better fighting chance if I get everything and anything. And I'm not saying that some organizations have the sophistication where they can get value out of collecting everything and anything. But ultimately, a lot of times I think it can become a distraction to the root cause of trying to find high fidelity threats and data. And so we're even at Blumira, we always encourage people to ingest more data. We don't charge for more data, though. We do that because there's possibilities of getting more detection, but the volume of data doesn't necessarily correlate with the accuracy of threat. Is what I would.
That's a key thing. I need people to. Can you say that one more time, but slower? Because I really think people need to understand what you're saying.
Yeah, the volume of data doesn't correlate that you collect doesn't correlate with effectiveness at detection. And so I'll talk about some of the effective areas, but it's like, if you're going to just collect one thing within your environment and you're a Windows shop, most organizations are, you probably should collect Active Directory logs. I mean, like, all right, that's the place you should start with, right?
So I've seen scenarios though, and I've seen companies, and I think this is an important point here. I love this one because I feel like this conversation there about the logs comes up all the time. I've seen scenarios where the bringing the logs into the SIEM becomes the security more than what you're actually doing with or getting out of those logs on the back end. That's where you find those, like, SIEM admins, where they feel like, hey, look, I'm doing this amazing work by pulling in, everything under the sun. But then I think that's also where companies get overwhelmed, because, if you go back a slide, right, and you've got that digger in the dirt, that's now a mountain. It's not a small hill of dirt you're digging through. You've now got a mountain of dirt that you're trying to dig through, and it makes it a lot more complicated. So I do think this is important because, I think there is collecting too few logs, but I do think there's collecting, I think both of those could be really bad security, to coin a phrase, right?
And the other challenge is traditionally with SIEM, and there's also challenge, I'm not going to say that we don't have some of the similar challenges, is the log sources change. And most SIEMs make you maintain the parsing. So you actually have to parse and correlate where these logs go and what fields they assign to. So it's really hard to maintain, as a small organization, 100 different log sources, or like 20 even, or even 5 in a lot of cases. And so the amount of time is focused on trying to keep it operational, because Cisco ASAs, I'm gonna laugh, but like the bane of my existence for the last 20 years. Good product, but like when you're on the vendor side of like trying to get it to submit configs and it only works 1 out of 5 times, you just want to bang your head against the wall after a few thousand years. But sorry, Cisco. Hopefully they're not sponsored.
No,
but they're
not this week.
They're a great company, but yeah,
not this week.
The reality with it is oh, and where was my point going? I got distracted, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm throwing Cisco under the bus. That's not my intention. Yeah, the reality is like, the new release comes out, now they parse logs a little bit differently, and they have new fields. You actually have to go and you have to change your parsing on your SIEM for it to work effectively. And you might not get any value out of your logs during that portion of time until you go and do that. And so it's just a ton of care and feeding in the traditional product space. We do that for our customers. We actually don't even allow customers to parse their own logs because it's not scalable if they all individually do it.
But that's okay, because you target, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's okay because you target medium-sized businesses, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And so that's the focus, is it's like, let's get them to quick detection, which is ingesting logs fast and quick, opposed to let's let them ingest anything and everything, and let them try and parse everything themselves and build their own rule sets, because that is essentially a data scientist at that point, right? And then what things do I actually look for and detect? So what I typically advise people is focus on high value. So like cloud infrastructure, cloud identity are going to be a key one. AWS, Azure Active Directory, Okta, Duo. I think hosts, Windows servers, Active Directory is up there from a priority perspective, Linux as well. And then productivity suites and firewalls would be primary things. So Office 365 or G Suite are probably the best examples where you can detect high fidelity threat. And then your firewalls, right? Those are your egress points on your network, which are great places to consider from indicators coming into your network. And then last thing, your EDR, like EDR is very complementary to SIEM, but like being able to ingest that information can help you as well. I'd say that's probably like, that's like the last thing you really need, further down on the list is getting that in and correlating, I would say, because it's complementary purpose built, and you're probably not going to detect that much more than the EDR itself does. And you'd probably end up building more of SOAR-like capabilities with that into an EDR when you're talking about SIEM and SOAR.
Which my second to last podcast was on SOAR. And let me tell you, I need SOAR. Anthony and I were both saying we need SOAR here now.
So on logging though, and Aaron, you know this from healthcare, we have to log everything. I mean, we don't get much of an option, but where we struggle is trying to figure out what to log. And it's difficult.
I was going to say, but do we? Because there's been many times where you and I have been in some requirements meetings where it seems like, the business doesn't know, the government regulations is kind of squishy. And I think to Patrick's point, if we dug in our heels a little bit more, we could probably get more accurate metadata, and then at least use that metadata to pull out, another set of deeper, like a deeper data dive, whatever that is.
Yep. Yeah, and I think on the compliance side, right, it's like, okay, what's the environment? What needs to be done from a compliance perspective? And does that actually align to security value? Because the other mistake all
again,
the time
to Lloyd's point.
Yeah, people are like, oh, I checked all the boxes, right? And I'll give you one example. Like, one of the vendor questionnaires asked the company, hey, we don't allow our vendors to use VPN, no VPN, right? So they just put RDP on the internet. Like, well, it met the compliance requirement, but it actually put them more at risk from a security perspective, right? So I think you have to be super mindful. It's like the intent of compliance, right? Versus whether it's actually adding value in security. Can be certainly two different things.
That's the whole premise of this Really Bad Security podcast. Is I think there are things out there that we've either historically or we think are good, maybe not, right? So yeah.
All right, free tool time. Yeah, so I think two things. So like Windows logs, very valuable, right? So you can detect a lot of different attacks. Like, hey, something's connecting to a Windows host via a public IP address. That's a bad thing when it's an internal host. Or there's PowerShell bypass execution going on. Hey, we might want to go investigate that. Or trying to think of some other examples, Mimikatz or Cobalt Strike as Beacon is going on. Like, those are all things that you can detect through Windows logs. And so logging Windows servers logs are particularly valuable in addition to Active Directory, because it gets that lateral movement aspect within your environment. Honeypots are complementary, which we have as a part of our solution with the sensor that does the collection. But by default, Windows doesn't log everything and anything you would want to do effective detection. And so we built a GPO template that you can either use, or you can see those audit settings and change them in your GPO so you get more verbose logging. And that would allow you to detect things like password spraying, for instance, and different techniques and tactics people use. And then the next thing is Windows has a free tool called Sysmon, which essentially gives you a bunch more event IDs that detect real threats. And so that's another effective piece to collect from a data perspective that you don't get out of the box with Windows, but it's free. So like, those are things that we suggest, even if you don't use Blumira, you should be enabling within your environment to get better detection. Any thoughts on these tools? Sysmon's not a Blumira tool; it's a Windows tool, by the way.
Yeah. No, I think it's nice that you guys offer that, and I mean, definitely correct. There is a treasure trove of data that's going inside of those Windows audit logs that they don't just give you without going in and tweaking some stuff, right? Yeah.
More gives, yes. Yeah, I think the next one I would say is creating rules. I think, with SIEMs, there's a combination of like, oh, there's a ton of rules I could enable that I could choose out of the box. There's a ton of rules that I can create, or like, I don't know what to create, so I'm just going to go create some arbitrary things. And this is one thing I consistently see people say, which is like, well, I want to see an alert every time something happens, like someone fails their password login. And we constantly have to question the customer and the organization. It's like, well, hey, first off, let's go do, so like people don't do analysis of what's the impact of creating a rule. And this is a big mistake, because essentially you're going to get inundated with a ton of alerts if you just arbitrarily pick all these things to alert on. So a common one would be like, I want to alert every time a password fails. And we're like, well, hey, let's go generate a report and look at all the password failures. I think it's like 4625 event ID windows, something like that. And we come back and it's like, oh, there was 1,000 password failures in the last 24 hours. Do you really want to?
Yeah.
How about when they break it, when it goes to lock? Like, that's a good example, right? I could carry, I fat finger sometimes. Streamline that down to when the account gets locked, alert us.
Yeah, that's still a lot of alerts, right?
Really?
Yeah.
People get their accounts locked that much.
And here's the deal. You might want that actually from a help desk support perspective to create a better experience, right?
Oh, a business use case. Yep.
But in reality, like, just because an account locked out, is it a true security issue? You could investigate that every time. But even as you get into a larger size organization, that's going to be pretty significant, right? And so usually what you want to start looking at, and I think I have this on the next slide, is persistence of things happening. So like, oh, a user continually is getting locked out when someone's trying to connect via a certain IP address, or many user accounts are being tried via the same IP address, right? Those are indicators of password spraying or brute force. And so that persistence piece becomes important. But yeah, most of the time people come to the conclusion in creating rules is like, I just want to create rules based on the information I think or I have, or like arbitrarily, which I'll talk about next, like everything in the MITRE attack framework, but not really discerning on what actually is a true threat, are very, very, common mistakes that make a SIEM unmanageable from an alerting perspective.
Well, do you think there too, and Aaron, I guess back to your question, I mean, does that, so if you create all of these alerts, it may or may not, right, be an actual security event. Is this where things like alert fatigue and, people stop caring because I get 300 of these password lockout alerts every day, and so I stop really thinking about it, and that goes into somewhere else? I mean, it is a key of Patrick, of like creating real alerts that do have a security context to them so that you pay attention to them when they come in? Is that?
Yeah.
No,
that's 100% what it is. It's like people try and a lot of times people are coming into an IT role, into a security role, or they might be on IT. And what I see the most is they'll spin up an Elk Stack, or they'll spin up Splunk, or some of these different products, right? And they'll just select all the rules, or they're all arbitrary, start creating rules based on what they think might be important or what the pretty graphs tell them, right? Like, and the reality is like, they're not actually taking the time to do the data science required to come to a conclusion on what is actually an indicator of a real threat. And so that's the challenge for most organizations, is like, they don't have the sophistication and the team of people it takes to do that. But they're like, oh, but I want to be able to do that, is a lot of times the discrepancy with us. Because like today, we do that for them, curated via a detection engineering team that does that full time. And the biggest complaint we have from a product perspective is like, when they first do a trial, they're like, I'm not getting much alerts. Which is that's like the wrong bar to measure. And so we encourage people to go actually test. And I'll hop over here because I'm talking about this now, but it's like, no, you should go look up common techniques and tactics, or go have a pen test run and actually see if you can detect any of these techniques and tactics, because that's actually what success looks like when you're talking about security detection and response, right? Not, oh, how many alerts do I get a day, or how many logs am I collecting? Which is normally what what people are actually measuring their decisions on how they buy SIEM.
Is
See,
that
again,
because they're
that
trying
goes
to get
back
ROI?
to that goes back to that scenario that I was talking about earlier, where the tools, right, and the security stuff that we're using become like more important to us than what they're actually doing. So if I go, look, I'm pulling in every log under the sun, I'm getting 2,000 alerts a day, I got this thing cooking, but maybe that's not good security. Maybe only 5 of those 2,000 a day are actual, real things that I need to go and look at. So do we as security people sometimes overcomplicate our life just by trying to, get everything under the sun, whether it's of high value or not?
Yeah, I asked some basic questions like during our engagements with customers and prospects. And like the first one is like, have you had a pen test? Okay, what does it look like? Let's talk about that. Because like if you have a SIEM and you're not detecting the pen tester right from their techniques and tactics, like your SIEM's not working in what it's designed for, right? And what most organizations we end up doing is like, hey, here's the most basic techniques and tactics. Like these are very simple things, but like go do these and see if you have any visibility into them, right? And it's like, what if someone deleted a Windows log? Like that's an indicator they're trying to cover their tracks, right? Very simple. Like, would you even know that happened within your environment? Like someone runs PowerShell execution bypass, right? Would you know that happens? Most likely not in most organizations. There are points where there might be meaningful reasons you do that, but for the most part, that's would be associated with a malicious activity if it's not, not something you've approved. Hey, when a domain admin's created which is a late stage ransomware attack, do you have visibility into that? And I can tell you, 90% of organizations, the answer is no to these basic fundamentals. And so that's kind of where, and these tests are like, you don't have to have Blumira to try these. These are for anybody, and they're really basic. Password spraying is another example too. So I'll hop back to the slides, but I thought I'd at least present that because that's kind of the reality as you look at the rule sets.
Yeah, I think that's great points, because we've had some red teamers come in and do some presentations for us. We've got another one coming up at CloudCon where they're going to talk about like the basic stuff that works for them 99% of the time. I mean, most of the time when someone is doing a pen test or you've got some sort of a red team type activity happening, they're not using super sophisticated means to get into your system. They are using all of this most basic stuff. And to a T, every single one of them is like, I almost never have to get complicated to breach you. It's almost always one of the most basic, simple things that people are just forgetting to take care of. So, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And then applying every rule, I think this goes back to the previous one, but like applying a rule, MITRE ATT&CK framework is cool and great if you're sophisticated, but like most people don't understand everything and anything under the sun in that framework, and all the different techniques and tactics. Like you have to be a true practitioner to really get what you need out of it. And so I think commonly people will start applying rules saying, oh, I want full MITRE ATT&CK coverage and knowing everything and anything that ever happens. And this creates alert fatigue, a lot of false positives, and it lowers the value. And that's where I think the focus more on prioritization and persistence becomes important, which is making sure you can detect the most basic of things.
Yeah.
Because the most attackers they're going after low hanging fruit nowadays with ransomware. And if you're trying to, if you're more worried about APTs than the low hanging fruit, then like, good luck. Leave that to like your more sophisticated organizations that truly are nation state.
You'll be researching an advanced threat while they're breaching you through password spraying, right? Or
Yes.
They'll be creating a domain admin account where you're busy over here looking for some super high-tech attack or whatnot. So
yeah. And it's, I mean, like commonly, like RDP exposed on the internet, or you have a this week third-party contractor has a machine in your environment that they have remote access to, and suddenly, an RDP connection's coming in from outside, and it's a bad IP address. Those are examples where, like, they didn't have control over that, but it happened, right?
Yeah.
Goes back to know your environment.
Yes.
This
Yeah.
is Dr. Eric Cole, my original SANS 401 instructor. Know your environment.
Your environment.
Most people don't. I mean, like, they put some technology in place, but they don't know their environment, right? They don't know what's normal and then what's changed, or they don't even have visibility into it. Is the challenge there. And then my other one is only using a SIEM to investigate incidents, because this is the reality of what most SIEMs end up being used for, is like, okay, let's look back and see what happened, because they don't get to effective detection, because they make a lot of noise, kick off a lot of alerts. So a SIEM shouldn't be only used for investigation in response, I would say. And the reality is I think a lot of times that's actually what they end up being used for.
Is that
after
because,
the fact?
Sorry, don't mean to interrupt. Is that because security maturity medium-sized organizations is just kind of all over the place? And is it something that we can do? I'm looking at us we can educate more, right?
Yep.
I was just talking to Rob Black from fractional CISO. I'm butchering that one. He's going to yell at me. I did a good post today talking about it's a journey, right? Your program is going to depend on your size, and then it's a journey, and getting people to understand that you at least have to make that first step. So I like where you're talking about the other one. Do some research first before you even buy that product, right? I think there's a lot of value in knowing what data is valuable to you, right? Because all the time, Lloyd and I live this all the day. Like, we have to put different protections on different systems in our healthcare system, right? Because if somebody slams the kiosks, right? Like, I'm less worried about that. That would be an inconvenience to the patients, yes. But if they're taking out the HVAC system at our downtown hospital, that's gonna cause some major issues.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's that most people aren't thinking like that. I would say in the small to medium sized organizations, right? And so that requires a certain level of sophistication. I think a lot of people are like, well, how do I actually, a lot of times, how do I actually delegate this to someone else, right? Because I don't have the resources internally to actually deal with it. And it ranges, like, company with 100 people, it's realistic that they might have one person in IT, right? Period. Technology, one person.
Right. Yep.
Like, that's pretty normal. If you look at a local city or county, they might have like 1, 2, or 3 people, right? And none of them are dedicated, and they're running a police department, they're running the city water, right? Like, utilities, people are drinking
Courthouse,
it. Courthouse, like, all these critical services, right? But none of them have security expertise. They don't have any resources and time because of what they're facilitating continuing to be operational, right? And so that's really the challenge is like, okay, I have to now make a choice whether I deal with something related to the business and IT, or whether, how much time I'm spending on security. And so I think there's a combination of, like, for ourselves, we manage both this combination of like a managed service provider, but also these organizations which are like, I just need a tool that does this. I don't know how to correlate logs. I don't have the time to mess with rule sets. And it's not only like, a county with 1,500 employees might still only have 3 or 4 people in IT. So you start putting that in perspective, and it's like, oh yeah, they have criminals. They're managing a jail. They're managing a police department. Oh, by the way, ransomware is evident, and they don't buy new technology often because of how RFPs and mills and spending works. Yep. So all their stuff's out of date. And so they're just a prime target for these things. But it's not only those, it's like you see organizations with 10,000 employees, like I want to give an example, like a manufacturer or maybe some others, and like they just haven't invested in IT historically or traditionally.
Or
so
like
security,
company, local furniture companies that unfortunately
and I think in that boat, I had a conversation, and I share these things not to criticize the people. It's like, yeah, you have a furniture manufacturer that has 500 employees. They have one person in IT, and their budget was $100,000, and 90,000 of it went to that person's salary.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh,
yeah, we talked about that with Steelcase.
You know,
we knew some of their people have been to our events, and what people don't realize when they just see the headlines, right? They say Steelcase, breach. But what they don't understand is we know some of those people, and they were fighting the fight, right?
Yeah.
It's not that security team's fault that the money wasn't invested in the proper security tools and everything else. So you're preaching the choir on that one.
Yeah, it can be a real challenge, but the reality is like, yeah, a lot of the organizations out there don't have the time to even know, what do I parse, what do I collect, how do I detect, what rules do I build? And so taking that stuff out of the equation is actually what's going to help raise the bar from a security perspective for most organizations, which is, I mean, more or less, and I'll hop a little bit further, like the approach that we've taken as an organization, which is we have to assume most organizations have limited resources. Most of them don't have the resources to do this, the time or the expertise, right?
Yes.
And then also the cost is a big factor, where it's like, I need it to be predictable. I can't like just get this events-based stuff which gets out of control and is arbitrary. And so those are some of the challenges that organizations have in the space. And if you look at a SIEM, it's like, well, yeah, if you have to do these 12 different things: ingestion, parsing, threat intelligence, detection rules, alerting, validation, like that's 4 people's full-time job, right?
Yeah.
Has been the challenge with it. So,
well, I think I think for a lot of organizations, especially in the SMB space, the idea of having a SIM, it seems complex. Again, like Patrick, like you said, maybe they're IT people who have now been tasked with security. They don't know exactly what to look for, let alone getting the logs in, let alone what to do with the alerts and other things when they're happening. So I feel like, and for larger organizations, I think when we go back to like 1 or 2, when you're talking about, pulling in everything, right? I think that gets to be a problem in larger organizations. And so when you look at it across the board, well, SIM technology should probably be the center of your security universe in every organization. For different reasons at different sizes of companies, this becomes, it becomes either complicated or overused, underused, not correctly used. And at the end of the day, we're spending a whole lot of time just managing a SIM. I hear this a lot of like, I'm just spending too much time managing my SIM.
Oh, is it me that's muted or him? Uh-oh.
I don't think I am. Did you lose us?
Anything?
Uh-oh.
Aaron, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Patrick's being DDoSed right now.
Technical difficulties.
My headset, something went wacky with it.
It's all good. No, it's just, I think just to wrap things up, for different reasons, depending on the size of company, I think that, SIM technology gets very complicated. And I think most organizations are either spending way too much time managing their SIM and definitely not enough time getting good, solid, actionable, usable information out of your SIM. So while having this technology in place is definitely really good security, not utilizing it correctly, right, is undoubtedly, unquestionably really bad security. And so with that, Patrick, we knew this was going to be fun. We've been looking forward to this one all week.
This one went like that.
Yeah. So we appreciate it. I love the you know, like the fun, enthusiastic take on security, where we work in a way too formulaic of an industry, and we're certainly trying to break some of those molds, and we really appreciate you joining us and helping us kind of break some of those molds as well.
Just coming into a meeting with a Thrasher hat on, like, is refreshing.
Absolutely.
The skate shop building up. But thank you so much for having me. One thing I would leave everybody with is like, hey, yeah, if you're looking at SIEM, measure based on whether you can detect real threats is what I would say a success is. And then, you know, if you want to try Blumira, reach out to us. We do free trial for anyone and everyone. As well.
Absolutely, and we will put some information in the detail section of the YouTube video if anybody wants to reach out to Blumira. Patrick, if we had a third or a fourth YouTube series, we'd invite you to that one as well. But we're gonna have you talking at one of our in-person events here before the end of the year, guaranteed.
Yes.
So with that,
yes.
everyone,
if you're based out of Detroit area,
yeah, I'll come.
You're going to be driving out here
nowadays.
I'll be over here for CloudCon.
Year and a half.
So everybody, hey, like, subscribe, share, do all of that fun YouTube stuff. Thanks for joining us for this episode, and we'll see you again real soon. Thanks, everyone.